I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about a video game that I really, really love. It's, for me, it's the best game on the PS4, um, and one of my favorite games of all time. It's so a bit of backstory. I'm a PlayStation gamer primarily. Um, I do dabble in other things like Nintendo games and things like that, but I've been primarily a PlayStation fanboy. Um, I've had a PlayStation since PS1, PS2, even during the troubling times of the PlayStation 3. While, people on the 360 were playing Gears of War and Halo, I was playing Resistance, Fall of Man, and Motorstorm. And, while those games were great, they didn't have the hype factor as, Gears of War, the original Mass Effect. But then later on in the PS3, we did get some really great games later on. The Uncharted trilogy, The Last of Us, obviously, and yeah, and in the end, it worked out. The PlayStation 3 did end up outselling the 360 at the end of its life cycle. But yeah, for the PS4 era, before the release of the PS4, Sony had a lot to prove that they were thinking of the gamers now. And the PS4 obviously is now a runaway success, outselling the the Xbox One, significantly, and it's a huge monstrosity of a success. But I got PS4 not when it launched, because I was a bit hesitant, after PS3. I got a PS4 in 2015, so it was the year that Bloodborne came out. And in regards to my experience with the Soul series, so Bloodborne is developed by From Software, known for the Soul series, which is known to be a very difficult and challenging game. And I had never played the Souls games before. I'd heard of them, I had some interest, but I was hesitant to play them. A, because of how difficult they were, and B, because the setting didn't really interest me. The fantasy knights and that kind of setting didn't really interest me. Whereas the reason why Bloodborne interested me was because it was it's a setting that you don't really see quite often. You don't see often. It's like the Victorian fantasy setting, borrowing heavily from H.P. Lovecraft. So you've got like some creepy fantasy, but like supernatural things such as werewolves and other things which I won't spoil. But yeah, it interested me a lot in that regards. So the aesthetic as well as the gameplay. The game was very, very action focused compared to what I've seen of Dark Souls at that time. Which immediately, grabbed my attention. So I had been following it, watching videos of it, watching reviews, and it obviously received critical acclaim. So I thought, when I buy PS4, I'm going to buy this. And I bought Bloodborne with the PS4. And straight away when I played it, despite having watched the videos for the beginning of the game, Central Yarnum, that part, And despite preparing myself for it and convincing myself to buy the game, as soon as I started playing, I sucked. I sucked really bad. I was so bad at it, constantly dying, constantly hitting walls. And then at that point, for any newcomers to the Soul series, to Bloodborne, once you hit the first wall, you can go two ways about it. You can either call it a day, give up, and be like, nah, this game sucks. This game's too hard. This game is too obtuse at times. Or you can give it another go. You can try again once you've calmed down. And yeah, just try and see if you can get through the initial humps. And there were moments when I was going to give up, but after beating the first boss, the cleric beast, and then the second boss, which I think is the actual proving grounds to whether you will continue playing this game, because the second boss actually forces you to use techniques in the game that you may have got away with not using up to that point. So the parry system with the gun, and visceral attacks, and just dashing away and things like that, being a bit more fast paced and being on the ball. The second boss definitely tests you more. And after beating the second boss, that's when everything clicked, and I was like enamored by this game, and played it through, completed it, played the Chalice Dungeons, which is the optional extra part, got the platinum for it, and even at the end of the PS4 life cycle, I still think it's the best PS4 game, one of the best games this generation, and one of my favorite games of all time. And the reasons why I think Bloodborne is so good compared to, I think it's From Software's best game, and the reason why I think Bloodborne is so good is, number one, the atmosphere. The game has such good atmosphere. By good, I mean harrowing, very dark, very scary at times. The game isn't a horror game. It's not horror, but, well, at least it's not trying to be a horror game. But the aesthetics, it just feels so good. It like immerses you in this world. You're in this, you start the game in this really creepy village or town that's like run down. It's a medieval kind of Victorian era kind of village town, in and it's dark, it's dingy, it's dirty, and the whole town has gone crazy. Basically, you're confronted with crazy villagers who attack you, dead bodies, and scary monsters like werewolves. And immediately when you're playing the game, you feel, when you're playing, this sense of dread. And I've always been a fan of like survival horror games. So this kind of scratched that itch. But the game wasn't trying to be a horror game. It was just trying to immerse you in this world, which just so happened to be horrific. And yeah, the atmosphere is amazing. Sound design is really good. It's you hear creepy sound effects, eerie sounds, um, the sound of your gun shooting. You know, in terms of game design, the sound of your gun, which is used as a parry. When you get the parry right, you get this amazing, like high pitch sound to indicate that you have successfully parried, which is super satisfying. And then you can perform a devastating visceral attack, which does a lot of damage on the enemy, and the sound effect for that, which is super satisfying as well. But yeah, so atmosphere, and then sound, and then next, the music is really good. The game's soundtrack is like orchestral music, and each boss that you encounter has a unique soundtrack, and you know, orchestral soundtrack with violins and a choir. It's just really good music that it gives you the feeling of dread when you're fighting a boss, but also like can hype you up, especially when you're getting closer to beating the boss. The music kind of starts swelling and is really gets you tense and gets you hyped at the same time. So that's all based on the aesthetics and the music of the game. Now, in regards to gameplay, the game is a masterclass in level design. The game isn't open world. It's what you would call, I would say, it has like well-structured zones that are interconnected. So it's not like a mission structure or anything like that. Once you're in the world, you're kind of in the world. But it's not like a open world. You can just explore the area how you want freely. There are some areas that may be locked off, but you will explore other areas. You may find something that gives you access to an area that you couldn't get to before. And each zone is well structured, enemy placement is methodically placed. The area is lovingly put together. So you have interesting experiences as you explore the world. And it's not just that, the level design is amazing. The game has some of the best shortcuts that you discover in any game. You can be exploring, you can be starting the game, you find like a gate that's locked off. You're like, oh, okay, well, I'll find the entrance or the way to unlock this gate later on. And you play through the game. You play through the game for hours, going further and further into the game. And then later on, you may find in the game like a random side path that you decide to go down. And you go down this side path and you find a bunch of enemies that you've never faced. You find like a ladder or whatever. You keep going. And then you end up in a familiar location. Familiar but different. And then as you go forward more, you realize that you have ended up in the area that you were in way back. And you have now been able to unlock that gate that you couldn't access before or get through before. And the game has a lot of those moments. There's a lot of those mind-blowing moments where you're like, holy crap, I've just unlocked a shortcut. And it may seem trivial to say, but when you're playing the game and you have this sense of dread, you have this sense of fear of like carrying on, and you're like, oh no, I need to get to a checkpoint, I guess, a lantern, which is like a checkpoint. When you die, you can return back to it. When you're having that kind of dread and progressing through, and you're like wondering when's the next checkpoint, and instead of getting a checkpoint, you find some sort of lever or some sort of like a gate that you open, and you end up circling back to an existing checkpoint, and all you've done is unlocked a shortcut. The feeling that you get is amazing. You feel like so relieved, but you also feel so enamored and wowed by the level design. And yeah, so the level design is amazing. And then another thing is, of course, the boss designs, the boss fights. This game has some of the best boss fights ever in video games, and I think From Software in general are one of the best, if not the best, at creating boss fights that subvert your expectations. They create some great traditional boss fights that you just beat, and the life bar, you hit the boss and you diminish its life bar until it's dead. But From Software are so comfortable in crafting bosses and creating boss fights that they're willing to break the mold. They're willing to create bosses that are very, very ambitious and subvert your expectations in the good way, where you're like, what the hell just happened? And there are so many shock moments in Bloodborne, and then they carry over into into the different games in the Soul series. Dark Souls 3 has some really good boss fights, and Sekiro from last year, which is one of the best games last year, had some amazing boss fights, and Bloodborne has the same, some amazing boss fights that are highly memorable. And boss fights in FromSoft games in general are never considered an afterthought. They are pivotal to the games that From Software make, and like almost a reward for getting through a zone. You're getting through an area, exploring the area, and you get to the boss, and you think you'd feel like afraid or worried about fighting this boss, like you're probably gonna die like countless times too. But when you get to a boss and a cutscene plays, or sometimes you're surprised and the boss fight doesn't have a cutscene, they just appear, you feel a sense of hype and a sense of achievement for even getting to the boss. And then when you beat the boss, you feel the sense of feeling you get is undescribable if you haven't faced a From Software boss before. So yeah, overall, Bloodborne is amazing. It is the best game that I've played, like I said, on the PS4. An amazing experience that I think about quite often, and I wish that I could wipe my mind and replay and re-experience the game again, fresh. And the DLC as well, the Old Hunters DLC. I normally don't really buy or play DLC for games. Normally, once I've completed a game, I'm like, yeah, I just want to move to the next thing. I don't really want to buy DLC. The Old Hunters was, one of the first DLCs that I bought as soon as it came out, and it's considered one of the best DLCs in games. And for me, it's amazing. It's 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 essential. If you played Bloodborne and you loved Bloodborne, then you should play The Old Hunters. It has some great story, lore attached to it, which makes it essential to play. Oh, and one thing I didn't touch on is the storytelling in the game. The game. So if you've played From Software games before, or if you're new to From Software games, From Software don't really do direct storytelling in the sense that you have like lots of cutscenes explaining to you what is happening in the world or to the story. They like to do a lot of environmental storytelling through description of items, and sometimes characters will give you cryptic, story like hints. And Bloodborne at that time, Bloodborne was the first Souls game that I've played, and the first game that I've experienced that does this type of storytelling. And the story in Bloodborne, when you read all the item descriptions and you do all the side quests and you play the Old Hunters DLC, you start to piece the story together. And I think Bloodborne has one of the best video game stories like ever. The story in Bloodborne is so good. The lore is really, really deep and really insightful. And I think From Software are amazing at doing this. And I personally think they should stick to it, because when they try to do direct storytelling, a la Sekiro, they tried direct storytelling with Sekiro. And the story in Sekiro, even though it was clearly told to you, I hardly remember it, and it was so boring. Whereas the story in Bloodborne, they never put it at the front and center. It's more for you to explore and discover by yourself. But the story was amazing. I've read, I think it's called The Pale Blood Hunt, which is a fan-made book that you can get online that clearly talks you through the story. And I've got books that have been written. One of them is called, let me just find it. It's called Dark Souls Beyond the Grave, which has one book dedicated to Bloodborne, and you realize the story in Bloodborne is deep, and it's really engaging, and it's amazing. So overall, Bloodborne, amazing game, highly recommend it. You need to go in with an open mind a bit in terms of it being difficult. You realize as you beat a few of the bosses and get to grips with the game that From Software don't create hard games for the sake of them being hard. They are very deep games that have deliberate combat, have systems that you need to learn and get to grips with, and the game is challenging but fair. When you fight enemies and you get killed by an enemy, there's usually a reason why you got killed. There's very little cheap deaths in the game. Now there are some that make you question, the design choice, but most games and most enemy encounters and deaths that occur from them can be attributed to a mistake that you the player made, and can be overcome if you carefully analyze the enemy patterns and get to grips with the combat and the systems in play in the game. And overall, when you beat an enemy that you've been, hitting a wall against for a while, it feels very satisfying. So the game is challenging, but respects the player, respects that the player is competent enough to learn, the tools that are given to succeed. Yep, so Bloodborne, amazing game. The fan base has been crying out for a sequel to the game. Bloodborne 2 is what people have been wanting for ages. And FromSoft have released Dark Souls 3, and then Sekiro last year, and also they are making Elden Ring, which is the game that they're making in cooperation, or it's being written by George R.R. Martin from Game of Thrones fame. So hoping that if there is more direct storytelling in Elden Ring, the story will actually be better and well fleshed out compared to Sekiro. But everyone's been hoping for a Bloodborne sequel. We will see. I think From Software said it's out of their hands, and Sony are aware of it. So we're hoping that something will come of it in the future, maybe on the PS5. There are also rumors that there's a Demon Souls remake coming, similar to the Shadow of Colossus remake on the PS4, possibly being worked on by Bluepoint Games, which did an amazing job with Shadow of the Colossus. The game looks amazing. You wouldn't think that it used to be a PS2 game. They reworked the game, the engine, the graphics, overhauled it completely. So Demon Souls is a game that a lot of people love. I've never played it. I've heard of it, but it's locked to the PS3. It's very old. Before Dark Souls. The whole reason Dark Souls exists is because Sony owned the rights to Demon Souls, and they weren't wanting to make a sequel. So then, From Software made Dark Souls as the spiritual successor. So there's rumors of a Demon Souls remake coming on the PS5, but we'll see.